Hello everybody! For this video on Middlegames, we're going to be looking at opposite coloured bishops and their dynamics, how to play with opposite coloured bishops in a middle game. So unfortunately I couldn't find very many on my database, probably because there aren't too many that are very interesting. So I found one of my games that I think is quite instructive. So this was played in the British Championships in 2014. This was the only game that I actually won. If there'd have been a very good game that I'd have lost, which had opposite coloured bishops in the middle game, I would have shown that, but this is the only one I could find. So, to start off, I was playing Lee Davis, who is, I think was at the time about 190 ECF, so a pretty strong player. And he was white and started with d4. I played d5, g3. Now this is a interesting move. Often what white will do is play c4, and if I don't take it, then they fianchetto the bishop. So I thought that was a strange move order, but it's still playable. Knight f6. And now bishop g2 was played. So I thought, okay, well, white is planning to play c4, then maybe knight f3, knight c3, so on. So I thought I'd halt that plan with b5. It's a rather strange looking move, but it does gain space for black and clamps down on the c4 square. So I was quite happy with this idea. White played knight f3, and I felt, okay, I need to quickly shore up my pawn structure and keep developing pieces in the meantime. So I play e6 to create a pawn chain and allow my dark squared bishop to come into play. And I was expecting castles, but instead knight e5 was played. And okay, alright, it puts the knight on e5, but I was still fairly confident that I could get a good game. Of course, knight bd7 would be a horrible, embarrassing, terrible, eye-watering blunder, because knight c6 would then win my queen. So I play bishop b7, and then I'll play knight bd7. And here white has a nice way of getting in his intended move with c4. So I take it with the b pawn, and knight takes c4 is played. Okay, so there's also knight a5, which could be a very annoying move, hitting my bishop. So I prevent that and take away the pin with knight c6. So now I am threatening to take his knight. And he plays knight c to a3. I couldn't really understand this move. I would have thought that knight to e3 would be far more active. Possibly just knight c to d2 and then the other knight to c3. But it would give up the pawn on d4. So I do understand, but knight a3 just is not very active. So I play bishop check, and if he interposes with the knight, then I can just take on a3 and double the pawns. Instead, bishop d2 was played, and I don't want to swap off here because I'm doing quite well in terms of having a space advantage, and if I just meekly swap off pieces, then I just feel like I'm squandering my advantage in development. So I play queen e7, ready to recapture on b4 with the queen, and then I'd be hitting d4 as well, so I'd win a pawn. So my opponent oh no, he didn't castle, he played bishop c3. I castle, then he castles. So now he is threatening bishop takes b4, but it's not that much of a threat, to be honest. So I play rook fd8. So again, I'm putting my rook on the same line as his queen, and I did feel that his idea was going to be to break with pawn e4, and then if I take with my pawn, I'll have a semi-open d-file. So I'm putting the rook there to discourage white breaking with e4. And again, he still can't take my bishop because queen takes, and I'm forking d4 and b2 with my queen. So he plays knight c2, bishop d6. So here I want to preserve my dark squared bishop because I feel it's better than his dark squared bishop, and I can redeploy it. Now knight b to a3 is played, so he's moved both knights to a3. I think knight b5 is the threat, so he's trying to get rid of my dark squared bishop. So I play bishop a6. Again, my bishop it's hitting a brick wall on d5, and it's unlikely he'll break with e4 anytime soon. So I redeploy it to a better diagonal, and he plays rook e1. And here I just improve my other rook with rook b8. And now he does break with e4. So I wouldn't have done this. I'd have probably meekly played e3 and then who knows? I mean, it's difficult to play this for white. Perhaps rook b1 maybe, but it is hard to come up with a plan for white. The pieces are tripping over each other. I take with the knight to make sure that he takes with the bishop. So he'll now have weak squares around his king, weak light squares. And I still have my light squared bishop, so perhaps I can engineer some threats, maybe some checkmating ideas. I now play knight b4 to maybe I could play c5 in a moment to get rid of his isolated d pawn, but also my isolated c pawn, and that would open up the d file for my rook, as well as the knight on b4 being a pressure, a piece that puts pressure on white. So he takes, and I recapture. Now he's not so eager to take with the bishop, because again, queen takes b4 would be a very strong threat. So queen a4 is played, it's a good move, and I now take on a3. So if queen takes a6, I do have bishop takes b2, and then I would have my rooks in very good, powerful positions. So he plays b takes a3, and now we have the start of our opposite coloured bishop middle game. Now again, you want the initiative, and you want to reduce the mobility of your enemy forces. So I play bishop b7 to force the rook away. Rook goes to f4. And I did have a plan for my next move, but on seeing rook f4, I thought maybe I could try trapping the rook. According to the computer, I don't do a very good job here. The computer says g5 and bishop b4 is the best move. And I'd looked at this and I thought, I can't quite trap the rook because it could go to possibly f6, or it could sort of escape rather annoyingly. Because if I play queen d7, he would play queen takes, rook takes, and then f6 is possibly free for him. But and also rook g4, h6, and then maybe h4. But I wasn't quite sure. I couldn't quite see this far ahead. But I could play c5. Bishop takes c5, queen c7, not swapping the queens. And now, after rook g4, h6, and f5 is coming. So he now has a trapped rook, and the best I could see for him was giving up his rook for a couple of pawns, and now black is completely winning. So it's it's basically a rook for 2 pawns, because the pawns on a2 and a3 I'm not really counting as 2 pawns, I'm counting them as 1, because they're easy to blockade and win. So this would be a very good position for me. I wish I'd have played this in the game. Instead, though, I didn't play g5, I played f5. Now rook e1, so he's threatening rook takes f5. Queen d6. h4 to prevent g5 from cropping up. And now here's the point. My bishop on b7 has the long diagonal here. It has very good control of that long diagonal. And his bishop on c3 doesn't have control of the counterpart, the other long diagonal, a1 to h8, because that d pawn is blocking the path, whereas my 2 centre pawns on e6 and f5 are just reinforcing light square control. So what I do here is I play queen d5 to blockade the pawn and therefore blockade the bishop's influence, and also threaten checkmate. So f3, queen takes a2, and if I was white here, I need to have mobile pieces, I need to have active pieces, so I would have sacked the pawn. I would have played d5 here, and that would then allow my bishop to potentially create threats against the enemy king. You know, I'm not saying it's desirable to have white in this position, but at least I've got some chances, some counterattack. Because again, in the middle game, with opposite colour bishops, the side with the attack almost always wins. Instead, queen takes a7, and now bishop d5. So the bishop is perfect. It's in the centre, defending e6, attacking along the diagonals, blockading white's pawn, which is in turn restricting his bishop. And I think from here I'm just completely won. So queen c5 was played to try and centralise with the queen. Rook b1. Takes. King f2. Queen c2 check. And here king e3 was played. So the king's very close to getting mated, so I felt that all I need to do is just have one more piece to attack the king. Rook b8. So I'm now trying to swing it around b1 and then perhaps put it on, say, d1 and then queen d3 checkmate, rook d3 checkmate, among many other options here. So white blockades or just blocks that b file and is threatening to trade queens, which I don't want. I don't want to trade queens. Bishop c4. I'm on the attack. Why trade? So now queen e2 mate is being threatened, and d5 was played. For me, I think that's much too late to play d5. But it does stop checkmate. So I played queen e2 check, king d4, e5 check, king c3, queen d3 check, king b2. Now, there is actually a checkmate here, which I missed as a forced checkmating sequence. While you think about it, I'll show you what happened in the game, and it might give you a hint as to the actual checkmating sequence. I took the rook because I'm materialistic like that. Queen takes c7, and here queen d2 check. Bishop can't take the queen because it's pinned. King b1. Bishop d3 check. King a1. Queen d1 check. King b2. Queen b1 check. King c3, and queen c2 check, skewering. So after king d4, I can take on c7, and my opponent resigned in this position. But going back, how could I have checkmated white in this position here. How could I force checkmate? Okay, I'll give you 15 seconds on this. Yeah, I don't need to take the rook. I can actually do the exact moves played in the game just without taking the rook. Queen d2 check, king b1, bishop d3 check, king a1, queen d1 check, king b2, queen b1 check, king c3, and the same thing as played in the game, queen c2, but now the king can't come to d4 because of the pawn on e5. So I shouldn't have grabbed the rook, I should have just done this first, and it would have been checkmate. Small nuances can sometimes make big differences. Either way, it would have won the game very, very quickly. So I think the key position in this game was when there were opposite coloured bishops. I mean, the opening was one that I felt I got the best of as black, but that isn't too important. Here, when the two bishops are left on the board and they're opposite colours, you have to be thinking about the initiative. You need to think, how am I going to activate my pieces and create threats while also stopping my opponent doing the same? So I created the threat of bishop takes rook, whilst putting my bishop on the long diagonal, which is always helpful. Then, okay, I didn't play the right move to win the rook, but I did give it a go. I thought of f5, which does create the threat of g5. So I was on the right lines, at least, which forced rook e1. So we're both fighting for the initiative. His two rooks are a bit more active than mine, but his bishop is very passive. And then, yeah, here I felt this was a missed opportunity. He needs to play d5 quickly, very quickly. I would play it now, to be honest, and then try and create something. But h4, okay, I get the point. You're stopping g5. Queen d5, f3, queen takes a2. So I've got an active queen, an active bishop, potentially very active rooks that are coming in. And he's got the rook on e1, okay, that's good. The rook on f4 could be better, but it could come into the game quite quickly with a well-timed pawn push. And the queen on a4 is doing an okay job. But the piece that isn't working is the bishop on c3. You need to get that working. I'm not saying d5 is the only move. Perhaps there is something else, but it's very difficult for me to see anything else other than pushing d5, sacrificing the pawn, and trying to go for active counterplay. Because as you've seen in lots of games and perhaps from some of my other videos, you could even be 2 pawns up in an opposite coloured bishop endgame and draw due to the nature of the bishops in the endgame. But here it's all about activity. So after queen takes a7, bishop d5, black's now completely winning. It's almost as though black has an extra piece in play. And the rest is simple. Just infiltrate, and then use all your pieces to checkmate. And then here is just completely lost. So I hope you enjoyed the video, hope you got something from it. Comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.